So, the EU referendum has come and gone. The sky has not fallen, although the same can't be said about the pound. But what is our Brexit strategy? Still a very divisive issue. There are many Leave supporters adamant that the results are asking for the so-called hard Brexit, and still appearing to hope that we can get as much as we can out of an exit deal without having to give up much at all in return. Whereas many Remain supporters still seem to think we can put the brakes on and resist leaving the EU without any negative repercussions. This isn't quite the grey area that some of my vlogs have been around, but it's also far from being a simple solution. So firstly, let's look at some facts, some perceptions, and one or two of my own opinions. So, fact. The result was 52% in favour of leaving the European Union. You can't argue against the results. It was a majority in favour of leaving. 52% is a majority even in a yes-no capacity. It might be a slim majority, but it is a majority nonetheless. I don't like the result, but not much you can do about it because it came in favour of leave. Fact. Although in the minority, the Remain supporters at 48% still made for almost half of the turnout not wanting to leave. So that does sort of temper the result. The result was in favour of leaving, but it's hard to say that it's a landslide, right, that's it, we're done with them forever. Because 48% is not a number to be sniffed at. Because if you were in something with more than just two results, 48% in some cases can be quite a resounding majority. Just in this case, it was a minority, but it's still not a section that you really want to overlook. So, opinion, the result was not in favour of hard Brexit. Although it was certainly in favour of not wanting to be beholden to the EU and of the UK being allowed to make decisions for itself. 52% versus 48% is hardly a right, that's it, let's wash our hands of the lot of them. This isn't a our way or nothing sort of thing. It's very much a, okay, there's enough of us wanting to do it this way that we should do it this way, but there has to be talks, there has to be compromise, there has to be agreements, because this was, in my mind, sort of an overall result in favour of, yeah, the EU doesn't quite work, but I mean, it's not that bad, but it's not our perfect fit, so let's try to find our own way of doing things. Fact. The free movement of people is one of the cornerstones of the EU. We can opt out by leaving the EU, but so far any non-EU countries to date that have a decent trade deal have adopted the free movement to gain access to it. That seems to be the price of entry, whether to the EU itself or to just certain advantages, but that doesn't seem to be likely to change anytime soon. Fact, we were previously already in a position of having a lot of the EU benefits whilst already opting out of some of the requirements. You know, we weren't a part of the Euro, and still aren't, or a part of the Schengen zone, so you know, we still have passport control in and out of the UK. But then as soon as you're on mainland Europe, it's just like, yeah, stick your passport in your pocket and walk around anywhere. But we still had certain things we were allowed to get away with that others weren't. So we already had it fairly good. Plus, whilst he was still Prime Minister, love him or loathe him, David Cameron had managed to come up with an agreement of more concessions from the EU that gives us more power to do things our own way and less of the kind of the ever closer union. So we already had some advantages. We weren't it's all or nothing EU way or the highway sort of thing. We were already having some advantages. Maybe we'd gone about as far as we could, but we had already put our foot down and said we're going to go our own way to a point. Perception. The referendum and its result has meant that we stepped on an awful lot of toes. Yeah, we pissed off a whole lot of people. And this is actually why I think that even if we were able to put the brakes on and remain in the EU, we've still stepped on a lot of toes. We have not made any friends. And, we have created a little bit of political and financial turmoil. And people are going to hold that against us. So, even were we to decide, no, that's it, we made a mistake, we're going to stay in the EU is probably going to be a little bit harder on us than they used to be. So, at this point, putting the brakes on is pointless because we've already burnt some of our bridges. Opinion. As we looked to our own interests, the rest of the EU are going to look to theirs. For each country, their own and the EU interests are going to be their first and second priorities, and probably, although not definitely, in that order. And we're going to be third on the list. They're not going to be looking at, okay, what can we give up to make sure that those UK chaps get off fine? No, they're going to be trying to make sure that that the EU can survive and that their countries don't basically end up giving up loads of advantages so that we can have loads of advantages. Yeah, we're they are going to be looking out for their interests. So, we're not going to be the only side with people negotiating for the best possible deal. And they've got, 27 people? Or 27 groups that are interested? Yeah. Perception. The EU is likely to try and do what it can to avoid falling apart. It's going to be hard, if not impossible, for us to get any concessions from them that might end up encouraging other member states to look at whether or not leaving or renegotiating would also work for them. The EU cannot be seen to look soft in this. They are going to have to do what they can to protect their European Union. And they are going to have to say, this is what we stand for, and not really going to be able to back down much. So there is going to be a limit to what we can get, because we won't be able to get anything that the EU might see as weakening themselves, because that's not in their best interests. Fact. We're a fairly small island nation, separated from our continental neighbours by water and from our and by language, and from our English-speaking friends by vast distance. We're sort of on our own a bit. Some think this is great. Some aren't quite so sure, but the simple fact is that we already have an awful lot of things separating us from the rest of the world. Do we really want to be completely isolated? Because, to jump forward in my list a bit, fact, we're currently in a highly connected world. The fact that by the time I've got this edited and uploaded, within half an hour or so, people from anywhere on the planet could have watched it and decided that I'm talking bollocks, says that we're pretty highly connected these days. Fact. not all component parts of the EU were equally in favour of leaving. Scotland had a higher percentage in favour of remaining than the UK average had in favour of leaving. And could this potentially trigger another referendum? It's certainly going to make a lot of people in Scotland think on, what is best for them. Because if, they chose not to go it their own because they wanted to be a part of the UK, but now the UK has decided that what's best for it isn't the same as what Scotland wants for itself, things are going to get messy. And Northern Ireland was also somewhat more in favour of remaining. It had albeit smaller than Scotland, but it still had a majority in favour of remaining. And then you get the whole issue of the Irish borders and the peace agreement and all of that, because an awful lot of the peace agreement was aided by the fact that we're a part of the EU, and by taking down the borders, you had the whole free movement of people and stuff, and it's like, could this jeopardise that? Maybe, maybe not. But it is something that has to be thought of. Opinion. Looking to our own interests to the exclusion of everyone else's is not going to work. Similarly, though, it is possible to find ways to look to our own interests in ways that are still beneficial to others. And that will make people better inclined towards us. Call it enlightened self-interest if you must. But if we try to do what we can for others, maybe they'll return the favour. It might be a selfish way of looking at things, but if it gets people to think together and work together, I think that's something that the world in general, not just Europe, is in sore need of these days. So, putting all this together, I've come to the following personal conclusions. We voted to leave the EU, but not to cut all ties and burn our bridges. We voted for the ability to make our own decisions, but this may sometimes require making the choice between the lesser of two perceived evils. That doesn't make it less than a choice. A choice doesn't always mean something good versus something bad. Sometimes it's something bad versus something worse. We won't always have perfect decisions or perfect choices that we're able to make for ourselves, but the difference is we will be able to make them ourselves. Whichever flavour of Brexit we go for, it's going to involve some compromise. A hard Brexit will cost us in terms of some benefits that we've enjoyed up until now, and a soft Brexit will cost us in terms of exactly how much sovereignty we maintain. We're going to have to balance what control we want over what advantages we want, because that's the essence of any deal. Because you can't have it all your way. We're not going to be able to basically completely win. The whole idea of negotiation is to try to find the best compromise that ends up with the best outcome for all possible sides. But it is going to involve some compromise. But also it's going to involve some compromise on the EU side as well. But if we want them to compromise, we're going to have to compromise some as well. And it's just deciding where we're going to do that. Another conclusion is that this does all have potential repercussions in terms of the UK's overall unity. With the question of devolved powers becoming more and more an issue, something like this, where kind of the overall UK decision might be at odds with what one of the component parts wants, that's gonna have ripples that are going to be felt for a while. Also, on the recent judgment that was made, I personally think it's only right that the final decision goes through Parliament, or at least some sort of formal approval process. I'm not saying that any deals that are struck have to go through another referendum to be ratified, but there should be some sort of approvals committee, and isn't that technically what Parliament's for? If you can, make it mandatory and decide that there should be a certain amount of turnout or a certain amount of percentage, but make it so that for any decision, it has to go through Parliament. I don't see a problem with that. But the other thing is, and here's something that I think some people might not have thought of, it might actually strengthen our bargaining position. Because, as is, the EU's negotiators will probably be looking to purely target the interests of our negotiators. And if they know what our lot are and aren't interested in, they're going to completely target that. And knowing that they might be able to get some compromises out of the UK by things that our particular negotiators aren't quite so bothered about. But if they've got to try to make a deal that's then going to be able to pass through Parliament, they've got to look at what all the other component parts are going to say. This doesn't put the UK in a weaker position, I don't think. Because it means that the EU are going to have to try to please more of us, otherwise there'll be no deal and everything will be dragged out. And yes, the 52% said to leave the EU, but that's as far as that particular decision went. Because 48% is an awfully high number of people to piss off. I think as much as slamming on the brakes right now and having no Brexit would destroy the country, a hard Brexit would do it just as much. You know, those are the two extreme decisions, all out or all in, and I don't think either of those are an option anymore, because there's enough people interested in the other side that just a one-sided decision would basically tear the country apart, I think. Whereas, well, basically a decent compromise decision, everybody or nobody will be perfectly happy, but nobody will be completely pissed off either. And that's the other thing about compromise. Because sometimes it's easier to sell a compromise if you're trying to persuade multiple groups of people that it's a good idea on your side. You know, otherwise it's, you know, coming back to your group of people saying, yes, we've been allowed to have a meal out on someone else's expense, so we're all going down the steakhouse, and then that pisses off the vegetarians and vegans. You know, that there's going to be compromise on all sides. There has to be. And I really, really hope that the people doing the negotiating are aware of that and they're on the ball. And I hope that the ruling to say that yes, any decisions must go through Parliament doesn't get overturned, because like I said, I think that's a very useful check and balance. And all in all, I hope that maybe, just maybe, the country ends up going in a direction that's actually halfway decent. Because personally, I was just wanting for not just more European unity, but just more worldwide unity in my lifespan. This seems a step away from it, but I'm hoping that maybe, just maybe, we can find a way of doing things which actually shows that the concept of international cooperation is a good one. Because the more that any country, whether it's us or anyone else, starts saying, well, look, we can do better by doing for ourselves, I think we've got enough of that going on in the world, thank you very much. We don't need any more of it, and we need to be going in the other direction. So let's see if we can, well, I don't know, do something good and lead by example. Stranger things have happened. Right. Well, I've rambled on as usual for a while, so until next time, see ya.